Lights down low, let's go slow.
You are listening to Late Nights, Early Mornings with Lady T, and H. Swift on Lituation Radio, where the dynamics of love and relationships are explored. Join the conversation.
Hey, y'all. Good afternoon. This is your girl, Lady T. And remember I told you I'm down here this weekend in the ATL, and we're doing the ATL style. So, I'm here, down here with my uncle, my dad's youngest brother, Hartley, and we're going to talk to him today about the Southbridge experience. He grew up in Southbridge with my grandmother, Addie Cooper, and he's going to talk to us about what it was like for him growing up in Southbridge and, you know, what the young people here nowadays are missing. So go ahead, Hart.
Well, first of all, thank you for taking the time out and doing this podcast. I wanted to talk about Southbridge, number one, because I think it had such a profound impact on my life. When I came up back in the 60s and 70s, in early 80s, Southbridge was a community of people that really knew one another. The people on my street, you know, it was like a brotherhood, sisterhood, motherhood, all that combined. Mm-hmm. And it really shaped my life and beginnings, because when you look at what's going on in today's society, you don't have that.
Right.
You know, I live in a neighborhood where I know my general neighbors 2 or 3 doors down, but other than that, you know, I don't know these people. Coming up in Southbridge, you knew everybody on the block over, 3 or 4 blocks over.
Exactly.
And if somebody got in trouble, not only did your parents have the authority to correct you, the people in the community, the mothers, the fathers, the big brothers, big sisters could say something to you as well. And I think that's missing in today's society, because these kids are running rampant. Mm-hmm. And I often tell my kids, when I look back on how I was raised, I wish they could have had the experience of Southbridge. Southbridge had a community neighborhood house, and the neighborhood house was a reference for us, a refuge. We can go in and play basketball. You had men in there that really helped boys become men. Mm-hmm. One of the guys, his name was Specs. He was one of the adults that kind of supervised the neighborhood at night. And one of the things that was important for me was basketball. And basketball was like something that helped me develop as a person.
Right.
And I was a pretty decent basketball player. Loved the game. And I never forget one night I was in there and Mr. Specs said, if you could make money running your mouth, you would be a good person. I didn't know what he meant, but what he seen was he seen some potential in me as a person that could speak. Right. And somebody could use that to make money later on in life. So to have that person say something so profound, and what I do in life now, I work in sales and marketing, that was the beginning. But he's seen something in me that I didn't see in myself. And I think that was because back then people had more of a vested interest in the kids in the community based on other than what it is now, because the folks don't know these kids.
You are absolutely right.
Kids running rampant, and you don't know who they are. Mm-hmm. I have kids in this neighborhood that walk up and down the street sometimes, and I tell you, I've never seen that kid before.
And you guys, I apologize. I didn't introduce my Aunt Sheila, my Uncle Hartley's wife. Hartley and Sheila Cooper are here at the table with me. And my Aunt Sheila grew up in Wilmington, and we're going to hear a little bit from her a little bit later. But continue, Uncle Hartley.
Well, again, like I said, that foundation in Southbridge of the community involvement, the people, helped set the foundation for who I am today. Mm-hmm. And when I look back on my self-development, much of it had to do with the Southbridge experience, mm-hmm. because of the people, the adults, the community involvement. We had a lot of things as far as Southbridge Day. You can go from one side of Southbridge to the other, and again, everybody knew who everybody was. Mm-hmm. And it was a type of thing where you either wanted to get better or you could stay in that situation. For me, there was enough people that seen potential in me that made me want to be better.
Right.
Of course, there was alcohol back then. There was drugs back then, but you had a choice.
Right.
You know, you can either say that's what I'm going to do, or I'm going to do something different.
Just like the kids today have a choice, but they get to that fork in the road and they decide I'm going to do right or I'm going to do wrong.
Well, and that's the thing back then for me, though. It seemed like the adults in that neighborhood had more of a vested interest. Like I said, I don't know the kids in this neighborhood, which is a shame. Mm-hmm. And I knew them years ago, but since my kids are adults now, you have a new set of folks coming in, and some of these people I just don't know. And the church played a major role in Southbridge for us. Mm-hmm. You know, we went to Harris Memorial.
Yep.
And every elder in that church were like parents. Mm-hmm. And I never forget Reverend Morris had me come up to the front of the church one time and said, I want you to read the scripture. I was almost panicking. But what it did for me was it brought out something that I didn't know I had, the ability to go in front of a crowd and speak.
Right.
And that was a foundation. That was for me a foundation moment to be able to go in front of the church and stand up and read the scripture. And it gave me the confidence later on in life that if I can do that in front of them, I can talk to anybody.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So again, it was just little nuggets that I took from Southbridge that helped me in my adult life.
Right.
And I often tell people, they say, where are you from? I say, I'm from a small town in Wilmington called Southbridge. Yep. It's right outside of Philly. I mean, it's only half an hour outside of Philadelphia. Mm-hmm. But Southbridge meant more to me than a lot of people can imagine because of just of the community involvement. The people, the friendships, the brotherhood. Because when I go back to Southbridge now, I can see some of the guys I grew up with, some of them are doing great. Some of them are no longer with us.
Right.
But those were choices that people made.
Exactly.
You know, and I just hope that people realize the importance of a foundation like a place like Southbridge.
Yeah. And, I have a lot of memories about Southbridge because, that's where you
Right.
lived and where, our grandmother lived on Hill Street. Mm-hmm. And I remember Harrison Memorial. I remember Grandma going to the prayer meetings, and she wasn't she a usher? And she was in the God's Helping Hand Club, I remember.
That's right.
And you sang on a choir.
Sure did.
With your cousin Berman.
Absolutely.
And Aunt Eloise,
Absolutely.
my grandmother's daughter, she sang on a choir, and her husband, Uncle Wayne. Mm-hmm. And, it was a thing where, we lived in Newcastle, but there were times where our parents would say, get in the car and go to church. And, the oldest one, Biz, would drive, and we would go to church over Southbridge. And when we were younger, our grandmother would take us to church,
right.
And I have a lot of fond memories of Southbridge because our grandmother ran that laundromat
Sure
on, that was on, which street was that?
That was on Newcastle Avenue.
Newcastle Avenue, Route 9, next to Codwell's Garbage.
That's right.
Back then,
That's
and
right.
her apartment was upstairs.
Well, upstairs. We lived over top
Yep.
the laundromat.
Yep,
That's
over
right.
the laundromat. And I'm telling you, boy, I remember one time I had this baby grand piano, and I was playing it, and she kept telling me to stop. And I wouldn't stop. And she said, TT, I said, stop. And I was going, pling, da pling, da pling, da pling. She said, stop. I was going, pling, da pling, da pling. She threw that joker all the way down at the foot of the steps. And needless to say, that piano was in a million pieces. And boy, I was hot. But we used to have a ball with her.
Right.
I can remember when there would be thunderstorms and we would come home from church. She would make me and my sister take our church clothes off. We'd sit there with our slips on, and she'd give us a popsicle, and she'd turn off all the lights and say, sit on that Davenport. The couch back then was called the Davenport. I remember the corner store by the church called Busy Bee.
That's right. Wow.
I remember Tanzas across the street. I mean, no, that was up the street. Tanzas up the street. But was the Kowalski's
right
across the street. Man,
That's
trust.
right.
I remember just like he does.
Right.
Grandmom had a couple of dogs. She had Taffy.
That's right. That's
right.
Yeah.
That was Taffy was
It was like
a beagle.
A beagle.
Because that dog could howl.
Right. That's
Then she
right.
had Alfred, the
That's
big
right.
poodle, the
The
big black
poodle.
poodle
That's
that was
right.
about 10 feet
That's
tall.
right. That's right.
I have fond memories, and you lived, a couple doors down from Herman Holloway.
That's right. We
And
lived
his
right down the
family.
street from on
Yep.
South Hill Street.
On South Hill Street.
South Hill Street, right.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, that's where your brother wrecked my car.
I was going to ask you to tell that story about.
Yeah, well, one
Go
of
on,
the
tell
things,
that story. We need to hear this.
Well, growing up over Southbridge, one of the things that I enjoyed was having my nephews and you guys too, Biz and T, to come over. I spent a lot of time with Rocky and Ivan.
Right.
They were like little brothers for me. So when they were growing up, and Rocky had just got his license, I'll never forget it. And he said, Uncle Hartley, I just got my license. Just got my license. I said, I tell you what, I'm going to give you a chance to prove how good you are. We got in the car. It was Rocky, and it was Ivan, and it was Rocky's friend.
Was it Chris?
Chris Parson.
Chris Parton.
And I said, Rocky, I'm going to let you drive from here to drive home, which was really, about 15 minutes from Wilmington, Southbridge to Newcastle, less than that, 10 minutes.
Right.
We couldn't even get 2 doors away from my house before Rocky actually ran into 2 cars that were parked. And you tell him, son, I mean, you know where the Masonic Temple is, right?
Yeah.
The Masonic Temple was only 4 doors away from where I lived at.
Right.
Rocky hit 2 parked cars right in front of the Masonic Temple.
And I remember, didn't Chris say he almost peed himself or something? Oh, my God, he was crying.
Rocky wanted to fight
God.
Chris. Rocky wanted to fight Ivan. I said, ain't no need to fight. It was on you, brother.
Yeah.
You're the one that messed it up. And I never told your parents about that.
Yeah.
Because to me, it was my responsibility to give my nephew a chance to prove himself.
Right.
And I wasn't mad at him. He made a mistake.
Right.
My car was tore up.
I mean, what kind of car was it? It was
a Ford Maverick.
That's what I remember. It was like a blue or gray
Ford
Maverick.
That's
Yeah.
right. And that car had about 2 or 3 dents in it. But the cars that he hit never got too much damage done to it. So that was a
That was a blessing.
That was a blessing.
Yeah.
So those types of experiences, the Southbridge experience with my nephews, and of course with you guys, my nieces, and my family, and just growing up in that type of neighborhood where you fought your buddies one day, next day you made up.
Yeah.
There wasn't no pulling out no guns. There wasn't all this crazy stuff that goes on today,
Right.
where there wasn't a true sense of community.
Absolutely.
Southbridge was a true sense of community where people cared about each other,
Yeah.
they knew one another, and
Yeah.
they came together. So that's for me, Lady T. Same experience growing up in a city like Wilmington, in a little town like Southbridge.
Yeah, that's awesome.
That was important
That's
to me.
awesome. That's awesome. Now, the one thing that I want our listeners to know is where you went to high school.
Well, I did something a little different. Being that I started out going to the middle school at Bancroft. And Bancroft was on the other side of town.
Right.
But Bancroft was the feeder school for people that lived in Southbridge, on the east side of town, south side of town. So Southbridge was a great school, but what was important was the teachers. They cared about you. And one of my teachers, Miss Gardner, who was our social studies teacher, she challenged me and a few other students, said, hey, look, I want you all to think about going to Delcastle. And at that point, Delcastle was a pretty new school out in the suburbs.
Right.
And it was a technical college prep school. And she said, I want to challenge some of my best students to go out there and compete with those white kids.
Right.
And my thing was, I always like a challenge. And I was a pretty good ball player because I was supposed to go to Howard High School.
Okay.
Howard High School had one of the most dynamic basketball teams in the state.
Right.
I mean, you had Kenny Hansen, you had Brother Reason, I mean, you had your Ricky
Eric Fuller.
I mean, yeah, it was an all-star based basketball team, and that's the school I was supposed to go to. But because of my social studies teacher really challenging us to say, don't worry about the sport, think about the academics, I chose academics over sports.
Right.
So I ended up going to Delcastle, and it was a culture shock because for me, you coming from the city, you're going to the suburbs, you're going to a school that at that time was about 98% white.
Right.
And my thing was, if I'm going to go out there, I'm going to compete with the best. So I took industrial chemistry. My thing was coming from Wilmington, chemistry was a big thing because of the DuPont Corporation.
Right.
I wanted to be a chemist. So I took 3 years of industrial chemistry. I played on the basketball team 1 year, 1.5 years, because of what happened with me. I ended up starting on the varsity team as a sophomore.
Oh, wow.
I mean, that was a big thing. I was a pretty good basketball player.
Yeah.
Ball hoop was a big thing. But what I found out was, as long as you're playing ball for those folk, you're okay. But what happened was, one of my best friends, Reggie Goldsboro, who went to Bancroft with me, he came to Delcastle. We went to Pocono Mountain basketball camp one summer. He got into a fight with one of our teammates, which was a white boy. And we came back for the next basketball season. The coach ended up cutting Reggie. I was captain of the team, so I went to the coach and said, well, look, I said, if you cut Reggie, why did you cut Reggie? You didn't cut Tom Durant. And the coach said to me, it's my team, and I'll make the decisions.
Right.
So I had to make a decision, a conscious decision. I said, if you're going to cut Reggie and not cut Tom, then I'm going to have to go ahead and go with Reggie.
Right.
Might as well cut me.
Right.
'Cause Reggie and I go way back.
Right.
So I had to make that decision, and that was one of the biggest decisions in my life, because I gave up something that I loved dearly for purpose.
Wow.
Because if you don't stand up for something, you'll lay down for anything.
Absolutely.
And my thing was, if he's going to cut this young man and not do the same justice to this white boy, I got a problem with that.
Oh, yeah.
So he ended up, the team ended up going, I think, 0-17. They lost almost every game. You
Wow.
remember my friend Ronnie Harris. And I tried to rally the brothers and say, if we do it collectively, then he may reverse that decision.
Right.
But you just always go back to, we have some blacks that are going to say, this is my opportunity to shine because I got a couple people
That's
that are no longer here.
right.
Unfortunately, that was the mentality that took over. So we got a couple people, Swan quit the team, I quit the team. Of course, Reggie got cut.
Right.
But the impact could have been much more profound if we did it as a group.
Right.
But the team lost a lot of games anyway.
Yeah.
But that was the first step in my maturity in saying, hey, you got to make a stand for something. I think a lot of that came from that Southbridge exposure.
Yeah.
And you know how my mother was, your grandmother. And she was a person of substance and purpose.
Right.
And you have to have some substance and purpose. I gave up something I loved.
Yeah.
But it was one of the best things I did because it prepared me for life.
Right.
Because I understood how people think. As long as you're an athlete and you're doing good, they love you.
Oh,
But
absolutely.
you step away from that for a minute and stand up for a cause, just like Kaepernick did.
Yeah, Kaepernick.
Hey, man,